The Psychedelic Report.
Psychedelic drugs
have played their part in America's long, strange trip toward an understanding of mind-altering drugs.
The psychedelic news.
Leading physicians, scientists, and experts share their wisdom about psychedelic medicines and healing.
50 years ago, psychedelic drugs were at the center of America's counterculture.
The brightest minds in psychedelic medicine. The Psychedelic Report.
We use the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy model that happens to have psychedelic effects that were not predicted when the drug was first developed.
From researchers to investors.
I think the biggest mistake we've made as a culture is the war on drugs.
To physicians to shamans and nonprofit pioneers.
Psychedelic drugs.
Recent research suggests some of them could have legitimate uses.
The psychedelic news
brings you diverse perspectives from the front lines of this exciting movement. The Psychedelic Report.
The Psychedelic Report was brought to you by Apollo Neuroscience and produced by Future Medicine Media. Welcome to the Psychedelic Report, your single source of truth for the psychedelic news. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Rabin. I'm a neuroscientist and psychiatrist trained in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy as well as MDMA-assisted therapy. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Psychedelic Report. I'm here with my very special guest, Dave Asprey, who is known as the father of biohacking, an entrepreneur and best-selling author, and the founder of Bulletproof Coffee and Danger Coffee. He is also a 4-time New York Times best-selling author and host of an award-winning Top 100 podcast known as The Human Upgrade. Dave's mission is to empower and enable people to lead happier, more conscious lives by using biohacking techniques and technology to improve the functioning and destiny of the body and mind. Dave has created billion-dollar industries to support his breakthrough protocols, including MCT oil, collagen protein, and functional coffees. He's the founder and CEO of Upgrade Labs, the first biohacking gym, and the creator and host of the Biohacking Conference, the largest, longest-running biohacking conference in the world, celebrating its 10th anniversary in 2024, which I hope you can all join us for, where I will be speaking as well. Most recently, Dave launched the 5-day intensive program that we are going to talk a lot about today on the show for ways to access deep meditative states and states of consciousness upgrades called 40 Years of Zen, an exclusive retreat that combines neuroscience, nutrition, and neurofeedback practices. Working alongside world-renowned doctors and researchers, Dave continually pushes the boundaries of what's possible in the name of science and evolution, which is one of my favorite topics to cover, exploring our true human potential. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always such a pleasure to have you.
Dave, I'm always happy to be here for you. And I love how people can't see this, but right before you started talking, you took about 10 seconds and you closed your eyes and took a breath and reset your nervous system state. Who does that? Only people who know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, part of the theme of the Psychedelic Report this spring, and a big focus of what we're trying to share with the community is, what modern neuroscience has to say about how to naturally enter altered states, right? And a lot of the work that you've done has been around neurofeedback, biohacking, and different ways that we can alter our state of consciousness, our perception. Breath is obviously a critically important piece of that, and a way to naturally restore a sense of control and centeredness to ourselves in any moment. And breath, of course, is an important part of neurofeedback. And breathwork has, really, had this resurgence through the biohacking community. And then that's translated into some of these powerful techniques that you guys have been doing at 40 Years of Zen. So could you tell us a little bit about that and some of the exciting work you're doing in this space?
I would love to. And I set out when I created the biohacking movement to bring in altered states of consciousness. And the model is that there are ways to go in and edit the settings in your operating system so that it'll filter reality differently than it did before. And at this point, I think it's indisputable, although you may disagree. I'm always happy to have a conversation, see if I might be wrong, but it feels indisputable that your body throws out most of the information that it could show to your brain. And there is a mechanism for programming it to know what to pay attention to. In fact, we call it paying attention, which is consciously directing the body to show you something, right? And if you focus really hard on something, you can see it. If you don't focus hard, your body won't show it to you. So this appears to be true by immediate n=1 experiment. But hey, who knows? We could all be living in a simulation, in which case it would still be true, wouldn't it?
Pretty much. Yeah. But I think too, up until this point, you're spot on, right? Our attention, which is not really taught. At least for me, I don't think that even through all of my training, med school, grad school, all of it, I don't think I ever really learned how critical attention training is, because it's really the spotlight of our awareness, right? It's like, it's this gateway that when we choose to pay attention to something, either intentionally or unintentionally, we're allowing it into our consciousness, our awareness, and eventually it does become part of ourselves. So I think you're spot on with the way you're describing this filtering process that happens that we can also train, which is really cool.
Ultimately, psychedelics let you go in and decide which of the trainings you've received you're going to keep. And as an example, there was one time I was actually doing like a real spiritual journey thing at the Grand Canyon, not with drugs, just, with under a full moon and lightning storms and beauty, with some mystical stuff that happened. But I was walking along the rim during the daytime, and I'm tall. So the Park Service didn't cut the trees right. And one of them stabbed me like right above the eye. I mean, it almost took out my eye. And this, of course, I have like sweat in the thing like that.
I've done that before.
Yeah. Right. Well, after that, for like the next 3 years, every time there was a tree around, I would duck, right? And I would feel that, right? It wasn't that I chose to duck. It wasn't that I decided that. It was that my body learned automatically to make me hyper vigilant around freaking trees, right? So,
yep.
What do you do about that? In my work, whether you're going to do something like ketamine or LSD or some of the other psychedelics, I would go in and I would actually do a forgiveness practice. And there's a very structured forgiveness practice that's at the core of work I would do with psychedelic integration or with the integration at 40 Years of Zen. And 40 Years of Zen is a 5-day intensive neurofeedback experience where we've developed now our own EEG hardware and software from scratch, manufactured overseas. There's 4 patents backing it up now. And we're using that and a bunch of other gear to help you get into altered states. And a recent graduate just said, it's like the best plant medicine journey I ever went on without the plants. And because we're entering these really psychedelic states, you don't need drugs for that. And there's breath work that's a part of it. And I going back to your original point there, if all of this can happen and you want to go back, there must be multiple gateways to access your operating system. And I wanted all of them to be part of biohacking. And so I did holotropic breath work back, 21 years ago with Stan Groff, the guy who invented it when he was probably only 80. I think he's almost 100 now.
Yeah.
And
incredible technique.
And it was actually life-changing for me at the time. And I've seen more past life stuff from that than I have from any of the psychedelics. Although I've seen a lot of it too under neurofeedback. And what I wanted to do was provide this idea that there's a broad set of technologies, and I include ancient techniques as technologies that allow you to have more control of your own biology. So let's bring in the neuroscientists, guys like you. Let's bring in the psychedelics. Let's bring in the breathwork guys. And let's talk about this. And let's bring in mitochondrial biologists and sports things and Navy SEAL guys. And through the years, breathwork has had a big resurgence. Wim Hof was on stage. Actually, Rick Rubin brought him to the conference years ago. I remember he had me doing his breathwork. So I'm familiar with something similar, that 2-mo breath. But he had me doing it on stage until I'm like pretty much tripping balls. I'm leading a conference of 2,000 people and I'm doing push-ups with my lungs empty and going, I have low blood pressure normally. I'm probably going to pass out here. This is getting a little extreme, but the audience loves it. And then they feel like they're not crazy. And the reality is there's other ways that I'm also putting into the world of biohacking, aside from neurofeedback and psychedelics and breath work. I've also added light and sound goggles. Physical vibration is a major, major one. And you're very familiar with that. And one of the leaders because of your work with Apollo. There's electrical stimulation. I've run a current across my brain for 25, actually more than that. Good God, since 1997, I bought my first brain electrical stimulator. So it kind of works, right? And you can put that on your vagus nerve or just use a vibrational device like the Apollo. And the other one that's entering the world of biohacking, I'm intentionally bringing it in, that's a profound altered state of consciousness, is either tantra or conscious kink. These are states of ecstatic bliss. They're also mystical states. And 20% of people report meeting God during an intense orgasm, men and women.
Okay.
And most people have no idea that's possible. If it happens, they're scared and they don't tell their partner. And it just looks like they had a little pleasure seizure, but they were gone.
Right.
And it's happened to me. I've learned how to do it. And I even tested the Taoist equations for how frequently a man should ejaculate versus orgasm. And I tried to prove them wrong over the course of a year. And there's an equation for men. And the rule for longevity is if you're a man, ejaculate just once a month, but keep your orgasm to underneath an hour. And I read that, like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I'm going to prove these guys wrong. And I went for a whole year and tracked everything and did the 30-day experiments. And I'll be damned, you absolutely can have an hour-long orgasm as a man. Your abs will hurt for a week. It's pleasant for the first 20 minutes. And after that, you're like, could I just be done? But the universe is like, no, you'll have another. And I've had the same thing under psychedelics, by the way. But was that a mystical experience where I could go in and do profound work at a level that I couldn't normally see? Of course it was. So I don't care which pathway you want to use. I want you to have access to all of them. You're going to feel it in your heart or your gut. That's the one. And if you need a good hard spanking because you're doing conscious kink and that's your thing, I launched a program at my conference last year with a somatic therapist who does that. And if you need tantra training, do that. And if you need to take a heroic dose of mushrooms, do that. And if you want to come and do neurofeedback with me at 40 Years of Zen, and that's going to include some breath work and very profound and precise showing of your brain what it's doing so we can guide it into states without the drugs, cool. And we're trialing using ketamine, which is a very safe and well-tested thing under a physician's care as a part of the 40 Years of Zen experience. So you're doing neurofeedback as different parts of your brain turn back on after a deep and profound journey. And I'm imagining that will be a shipping option within a couple months here because it's what I would call the forgiveness drug. And David, can we talk about forgiveness? Actually, I called you David. You're Dave.
Oh, it's okay. Either way.
Can we talk about like the forgiveness process?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. And I think that, I love the way you're describing this as well. It's so fascinating. And some of the words you used are really interesting, right? Because we're talking about, in particular, this word filtering our consciousness, filtering our awareness, because the idea of a filter is that you can train it, right? You can increase the way that it filters different things so that stuff that you want to come into your awareness comes in more often, stuff that's useful to you, stuff that's true. And then an untrained filter lets everything in, right? And it doesn't necessarily know how to filter out what is good for us, what actually benefits us coming into our lives and our attention, and what doesn't. And psychedelic states are really interesting and a major topic of this show because there's this common misconception in the world that to enter a psychedelic state you require a psychedelic substance. And this is, couldn't be further from the truth. And I think we see this a lot from our modern studies of psychedelics and also looking at the ancient origins of that word, which was coined by Humphrey Osmond and Aldous Huxley in, I believe it was the 1950s, to mean mind revealing, psyche meaning mind, delos meaning to show or to reveal. And one of the things the ways I like to describe this is that healing and transformation and growth is, there's many doors to this room, right? And one of those doors is psychedelic states, and we can access those states through meditation, mindfulness, yoga, soothing touch. We just released a show with Jaya around what you just were talking about, how to access psychedelic states of healing and bliss, and even access to a sense of divine connection through sexual intercourse and intimacy, and that you can practice these things. You can train yourself and your filter. And part of what I think is so fascinating about psychedelic medicine and neurofeedback in particular is that they both seem to be working in a similar way, which is that they're expanding awareness of the way that our brains work to process information and make meaning from things in the world and experiences. Meaning being, what happens when we have an experience and how does that relate to our sense of self and the way we see the world, right? And then neurofeed. And so in psychedelic medicine, when we do guided psychedelic therapy, for example, with ketamine for our patients, it's a very like psychological cognitive exercise where people have to have the felt experience and then talk about it, figure out, learn how to put words to it and make it real and understandable for themselves, which is what we call the integration process. And then neurofeedback, which really comes out of this field of biofeedback, which is this training technique of learning how to master your breath with modern technology. Neurofeedback is how to master your brain and understand what parts of your brain, as you described earlier, are active when we're thinking about ourselves or the world in a certain way. And when we think or feel differently, how do those neural networks change? And how can we steer the ship a little bit better? And effectively, the way we see it is we're training the filter, right? You're learning, you're showing somebody, this is what your brain looks like when you're thinking and feeling this way. And this is what your brain looks like when you're thinking and feeling this way. What do you like better? And let's figure out how to teach you through the feedback process. How do you, train yourself for your filter to work the way you want to, so you can be in more of these desirable, joyful, blissful states more often? Is that similar to your experience, what you're seeing with your participants? It
is similar. And I love it that you're talking with Jaya. Jaya was on the main stage at the biohacking conference.
I remember.
We're going to be speaking here in May, end of May, beginning of June in Dallas. Guys, go to biohackingconference.com and hear Dave. Well, Dave and Dave, both of us on stage. It'll be a lot of fun. Jaya was there a couple of years ago on stage, and it was such a juicy interview because we talk about these altered states and the fact that they're there, and that you can train yourself to be so attuned to your partner that you can actually feel your partner's orgasm in your own nervous system. When they experience orgasm, you experience an orgasm without any of the associated mess. So people say, what? All this stuff, there's so many things, but how would you know it's possible if you haven't ever experienced it? It's outside of your knowingness. And when you take a psychedelic or do the breath work or do the neurofeedback or listen to drums or gaze at a candle or do all of these different practices, ecstatic dancing, whirling dervishes, all of them, they're all getting you into this group of states. They're different states, but they're in the same quadrant of the map. That allow you to do different things. And including intimacy is interesting because what I find is when someone's doing the 40 years of Zen reset process, this is a process where you start out and you say, all right, I know that I'm reactive to this thing. And I know that sucks energy and it's not something I want to do. So you go, what's the first time I ever felt like that? And you figure out what it is. And if you don't know, you just do your best because it'll come to you real quick. Right. And as soon as you start doing that, you run through this set of steps that we teach you. But the first thing, if you want to let go of that reactive pattern, is you have to find the originating trauma, or as close as you can. Like I said, it doesn't matter if it's the real originating trauma, you'll get there. So find the first time.
Yeah, it could even be the first thing that comes to mind.
That's right? Usually the originating trauma, but it doesn't have to be, right? So you could be like, I'm working on that time I was in a car accident, right? So okay, I'm going to work on that. And then you say, okay, I'm going to stop being reactive to that because every time I go to an intersection, I get tense. After you start that process of resetting that, you may realize, oh my God, there's that time I fell off my bike. And like your body thinks they're the same thing, right? So then let's do the bike. And once you fix the bike trauma, the car trauma is gone because once you fix the first one, it's like traveling in time. And like we're talking about, you can do this with or without psychedelics. Like they both work. And what you do is the first thing is you have to find something you're grateful for. And this is missing from most of the spiritual and almost all of the therapeutic stuff. Even EMDR doesn't have this step, and it drives me crazy. And it's like a core part of 40 years of Zen. It's if you want to forgive something, number one, forgiveness is not about telling the person that you forgive them or that what they did was okay. It just means you stop being reactive to it. Mm-hmm. And if you want to do that, you have to find something you're grateful for. And it doesn't matter if it's a big thing. You say, I'm grateful I still have both my legs. Great. The gratitude's a spark that can light the fire of forgiveness, right? And then you can do forgiveness and then you're non-reactive. But so many people try to do forgiveness without gratitude and it will not work. Or they just focus on being angry because it's a power source. right? I'm going to get my energy from anger. That kind of anger will burn you up. So you can use anger to get started, but use anger to get enough energy to go in there and then find some gratitude and do forgiveness. And then you have 10 times more energy because you're not wasting it on being pissed off all the time.
Right.
And that's what the world's highest performing, most peaceful, most respected people do, is they somehow learn how to do this. And in my process for doing that, I've let go of so many different things. And could you do that in the middle of orgasmic bliss? Actually, you could. And you can do it certainly on ketamine. In fact, I think ketamine is, I would call it the forgiveness drug. It's really easy to let go of a grudge on ketamine. You see it from a different thing and a different angle, and it just goes. And if you have a structured practice around gratitude, forgiveness, reset, and then you're using the right substances, it's so buttery smooth and effortless, and you can just process so much.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Report.
For me, in this last couple of years, I've had a lot happening. I moved to a new country. I got consciously uncoupled. I had a very substantial embezzlement situation. And my largest company was sold in such a way that I did not have a financial outcome I was counting on. Any of those things, losing your life's fortune, having stuff embezzled, relationship change, all those things, they're on the WHO list of lifetime stressors. And I used to think that mattered, but now I know the WHO is a bunch of lying shitheads. So I'm not going to quote that as being relevant because they've lost their credibility in the world. But if a qualified organization was willing to talk about the big stressors, those are 4 of the big stressors. And what I did to be able to be at peace and to like my life and all that is it took me about 6 hours of neurofeedback using the latest version of the 40 years of Zen tech. Well, in an hour, number one, I've spent 6 months of my life with electrodes on my head over the last 10 years building the program. So I am a trained forgiveness ninja, right? Like I know how to do it. Marshall Allers knows how to move. This is my thing. And that can grow compassion and things like that. So what I did is I sat down and started, I got to process the anger that I have about this relationship, the anger I have about this financial thing. And the magical thing about any of these techniques to change your filter, the number one thing that's likely to be holding anyone listening back is they see themselves as a victim. You're a victim of the other political party. You're a victim of your upbringing. You're a victim of you're being in this group that's being oppressed. You're a victim of your boss. You're a victim of anything. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, whatever the circumstances that you don't like.
And so seeing yourself as a victim has, and you've probably seen the study I'm going to reference here, is it makes you much, much more likely to judge each other on a much more rigorous set of principles. In other words, it makes you judgy. That person didn't do it perfectly, and it makes you far more likely to call for very harsh penalties. In other words, if you see yourself as a victim, it makes you a Karen. And this is just neuroscience. Like, am I wrong?
I mean, it's a really funny way to describe it, but you're not wrong. It definitely, when we embody that victim mindset, it consciously or unconsciously, it absolutely results in increased judgment against self and others. And we see this in our clients all the time. And they don't even necessarily realize how hard they're being on themselves. They think when they come to see us, they see it as, from the victim mindset, being surrounded by people who are just not doing it right around them, and they're at the whim, right? And when we start to reflect on that and help people understand that it's actually the self-judgment that's the source of a lot of the problems from the victim mindset, then people start to realize, oh, wait, I'm not just judging everybody else. I'm really judging myself. And that, as a result, I'm taking out that judgment on everybody else and being harder on them, which is not serving my goals.
It's so well said, Dave. There's the self-critic. So what I teach people to do is okay, let's sit down. Let's do this reset process. So, let's say that, little Susie was mean to you in seventh grade and, she publicly shamed you and you're still afraid of women now and you're 30 years old. How many times does this happen? All the time.
A lot.
It's set a pattern, right? And once you run this whole forgiveness thing against little Susie, you're no longer triggered by her, but you're not done, because you got to turn it around and run the reset process against yourself for allowing that to happen to you, even though clearly you were in seventh grade. How could you have known? But until you're whatever age you are, you just, you missed out on all these opportunities to have healthy relationships, and you can be kind of pissed at yourself for that. So you forgive the other person, you forgive yourself. And sometimes you forgive, whatever little Susie did when she, threw a wad of paper at your head. You might have to forgive the paper. Why? Because your body is incredibly stupid. It's just very fast. So you do all that. And I like to under neurofeedback at 40 years of Zen, but you can do it under ketamine. You can do it in these other states. When it pops into your head, it's there as a gift for you to do the work. And you can do it under holotropic breathing. All of these states are available. I don't do a lot of forgiveness in like profound spiritual orgasmic states, to be perfectly honest. You can, especially if it was around a trauma that involved intimacy.
Right.
But usually those are more generative shamanic states for me anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I love having these conversations with you because I feel like every time we connect again, there's just so much evolution of thought that's happened. And it's like the conversation just picks up where the last one left off. And
we always have fun. Where are you based now, Dave? You move around a lot.
I'm basically in the same spots. We're between San Francisco and New York, and our company's based in Pittsburgh.
Got it. So you're bounced. I just see you at conferences all over the place. So
we're on
still Bay Area. Cool.
Yeah, we're on the tour. But I think one thing that you brought up that I really want to drill down on for a second for people is something that you and I have talked about at least once before, which is this idea of gratitude and forgiveness being linked together, and that they're like almost emotional muscles that we can practice and learn how to use when we understand that they're inherent tools in us, that we all are born as humans with the ability to express gratitude and forgiveness. And gratitude is a particularly interesting one. And because I feel as though, in our Western medical training, it's completely underemphasized. And there have been several papers that have come out looking at just what happens to people's mood and anxiety and stress when they start doing a regular gratitude practice. And it certainly seems to help. But I think we see it more on a population-wide culture basis. We see it in indigenous communities, in spiritual practices. And one of my favorites is the Shipibo practice, which is one of the Peruvian Amazonian cultures that has been doing traditional ayahuasca ceremony for probably thousands of years. And they're one of the oldest medicinal shamanic cultures. And when I went to study with them for a week in 2017, because I was always fascinated by tribal culture, we led a research journey down there to start epigenetic studies looking at how is tribal medicine similar to Western use of psychedelics, and is there a similar underlying mechanism? And that study's still ongoing, but one of the things that I learned from this ancient culture was the importance of gratitude and forgiveness, and that it's actually part of a system that they use for healing and personal growth and transformation. And they call it the 4 pillars. And this is kind of like, the English American interpretation, but they describe it as the 4 pillars. And, from a psychological perspective, I kind of describe it to my patients. It's become a core part of my practice, which is the 4 pillars of rebuilding trust in ourselves. Wow. Because when we had trauma that is unresolved, it's unprocessed, or we experienced a significant challenge in our lives, but we weren't supported afterwards, which can in and of itself be a trauma, or we were blamed for something that happened to us by our peers or role models when we were young. And, that basically builds up a sense of distrust in ourselves, which is, to some extent, whether we realize it or not, it's this thought process of how could I have let this happen to me? Right. And if I could have let this happen to me, can I trust myself to not let it happen again? Can I trust myself to learn from the lessons and keep myself safe moving forward? and still expose myself to new experiences? Can I trust myself to experience the unexperienced, right? Which is really in large part the goal of life. And the four pillars really highlight in a traditional spiritual sense exactly what you said just a few minutes ago, which is what we now use in our clinical psychiatry practice with and without ketamine therapy, which is gratitude comes first, self-gratitude in particular, which is just trying to spend time practicing rather than judging ourselves all the time and amplifying the self-critic. Try to practice finding things about us that we can be grateful for. And that's step one. It's just find as many things as you can in every moment or day to be grateful for, like your breath, the fact that you were able to get up and out of bed this morning and get on with your day, the fact that you feel rested, the fact that you have food that you can eat, that you know how to prepare for yourself, that tastes good and is nutritious. Any of these little things are opportunities for gratitude. The warm feeling of sun on your face, right? When you get up and go outside in the morning. I mean, all of these things start strengthening that gratitude muscle. And that gives us the self-awareness and the foundation of then being able to invite the practice of forgiveness into our lives. And that forgiveness is, as you described, it's like this ultimate act of letting go these things that we've held on to that make us resentful, mad, angry, and allowing ourselves to step away from the shame, right? And to be grateful for what lessons we might have learned from that. And then the step up from forgiveness that you also mentioned is self-compassion, right? Mm-hmm. And then self-compassion, once we learn to forgive ourselves, we can learn to forgive ourselves in advance, which is almost like what compassion is. It's the idea that we know we're going to make mistakes. We're human. We all make mistakes. It's just part of life. So we shouldn't not take risks and not judge ourselves all the time because we know we're going to make mistakes and be afraid of failure. We should learn to be patient with the process of being human. And then all of that culminates into this beautiful thing that the Shipibo people call self-love, right? And it's just this really nice system for elegantly helping people down their spiritual process of rebuilding trust, repairing trust in ourselves, and retraining this idea of the victim mindset where we start to realize, hey, maybe this isn't serving me, right? Maybe this way that I was taught to think about myself isn't actually consistent with the way I really am. And you can learn that through ecstatic states, in intimacy, in dreams, in ketamine experiences. Ketamine, as you said, is a really interesting way to access these states. And neurofeedback also can train us to learn how to access these states and process them. And so you mentioned this. I would love to dive more into forgiveness. And I think, you mentioned this idea of combining ketamine with neurofeedback, which I've never heard about before, but I think is really fascinating. So I'd love to hear more about that as well.
We're pioneering this at 40 Years of Zen, and I haven't found any meaningful literature other than, here's what happens at the hospital when they use ketamine to put you under, like, here's the brain states. I'm not interested in that. And none of the stuff that we do at 40 Years of Zen is medical. Like, we design our own consciousness-oriented neurofeedback equipment that does not diagnose, treat, or cure anything. And we bring in a doctor who administers the ketamine on their own, on their own medical license and their own thing. So just to be really clear, 40 Years of Zen is not a ketamine provider. Ketamine is an optional add-on that you can add on to your 40 Years of Zen neurofeedback experience. And we are in the process of beta testing it, and it should be launched for the public quickly. And the reason I'm doing it is, once people know how to drive their brain using the 40 Years of Zen gear, you can go places. And when I first started this, it's kind of like driving an old car or a truck. You push it in that direction and it drifts over and it's kind of sloppy. And the new stuff, it's like driving a sports car. It's very tight. You're like, oh, look, I did that one thing and quickly my brain changed and I can feel my change of state. So still, we're always struggling with something I'm writing about in my newest book that hasn't come out yet. I'm still in the writing process, but everyone wants to train their intuition and creativity, and they want to train their reactivity, so they're less reactive and more intuitive. And what I'm finding is that especially there's a difference between men and women, but intuition is the fastest signal that comes through. It's the first one. And then the second one can be a built-in reactivity from trauma. And the third one is ego, which is a conscious resetting. So the timing is really important when these signals come in. So you're sitting there and you're trying to drive your brain into a new state, and you're getting into this beautiful intuition thing, and your brain is drawing pictures of things you haven't thought of. You're like, this is amazing. And then you touch on something that might be a little bit of a trigger for you, and then that overcomes the intuition thing, and then you don't see the intuition anymore. Yeah. And then you think about it and say, that's dumb. And you don't even see the emotion anymore. Right. So it's a matter of unpacking these things. And once you learn the sounds that are associated with this, it's like inside your brain, there's these knobs and dials and gauges that show you your states, but none of them are labeled. So you don't even see them because they're useless data. It's all just static and a bunch of noise. Like if you sat down in an airplane, like a commercial cockpit, there's 5,000 switches in there. You don't need them do, and it's just a bunch of chaos. But if you learn how to fly, you would know, I got to flip these three. That one matters. That one I can ignore unless it's blinking, right? Well, right. Your brain has the same thing, and we're just showing you the instrumentation at 40 years of Zen. Once you have that, then you go into your ketamine experience with the doctor.
You're listening to The Psychedelic Report.
And you're hooked up. What happens that's really, really interesting there is as your body comes back online after a deep and hopefully powerful ketamine journey, where you may have some insights and things like that, parts of your brain are awake and parts aren't, but they're still fully instrumented and you're getting the feedback. So these are presenting some really powerful opportunities for creating states that might take even more than 5 days. We typically find 5 days of 40 years of Zen. That's a standard program that gives people the brain states that would take, 30, 40 years of daily meditation practice. This is real. Like you can see that, right. Wow, look at that. Your brain waves are different. But adding this in, I think can accelerate the process. And I'll tell you, if I can get people to come in and spend 5 minutes and become fully enlightened, I would much more happily do that. I stack people up all the time. Not there yet. But if we can find any technology, I'm going to layer it in to cause people to have more progress, more ability to control their state after they leave. And the integration process for 40 years of Zen, the kind of psychedelic neurofeedback, with or without actual psychedelics, it'll allow you to make profound changes if the integration works. And so we do some other proprietary integration stuff that's also been really powerful, because as you know, with psychedelics, if you forget everything that you just did, you didn't get the message, you didn't get the learnings.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think, just from the way that I hear you talking about how ketamine can be amplifying to neurofeedback experiences, it reminds me of what our clients benefit, why our clients benefit so much from it in our therapy sessions, because what ketamine has this way of doing, which it does in about 60 to 90 minutes. And for those who have not heard our prior specials on ketamine therapy and are new to this, it's the only legal psychedelic medicine, and it's almost entirely synthetic. Which is interesting because it actually was developed as an anesthetic agent originally, used for surgery and evacuating wounded soldiers from the battlefield without going into shock. And it has many uses. And it's a very safe anesthetic. And interestingly, when used at low doses that are just at the threshold of psychedelic state, people can have these potent antidepressant effects, potent anti-suicidal effects, and can have these really powerful opportunities to retrain their brain. And effectively the description that I get most commonly from these experiences is that my mind quieted and I was able to have this opportunity to just non-judgmentally observe myself. Right. And I think when you're thinking about neurofeedback, in a lot of ways, we're training people to enter that quiet mind state so that they can understand when they're judging themselves and when they're not, and when they're expressing gratitude and when they're not, and what that looks like. And in a lot of ways, it's the cognitive retraining of showing people, hey, this is what it looks like under the hood when you're actually having this experience, and then let's teach you how to get there more often. Let's teach you how to access this powerful state of being that we in therapy call observer mind, which we train for, a decade to learn how to do with our patients. But it's really actually quite challenging to do and master for yourself. Like you said, it can take 20, 30, 40 years of mindful practice to learn how to truly be a non-judgmental observer of oneself. And yet tools like ketamine and neurofeedback can rapidly accelerate that process, which is so interesting.
It's awesome that you're talking about ketamine. I feel like we've had this over the last 10 or 12 years, this idea that we weren't allowed to have cannabis in high school. Now that it's legal, let's go crazy. I don't think it's a great psychedelic or a particularly good drug for your brain for most people, although there are some people where it's profound. And it was almost because it was illegal, there's this crazy amount of demand, and now it's passed and we have an oversupply. And it turns out, cannabis isn't going to be larger than the petroleum industry or anything like that. And with the, I'm saying illegal, at least so far, psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA, and I've had Rick Doblin, I think 8 years ago on my show going, let's do MDMA for therapy. I've seen profound effects for people. There's going to be a large number of people as they become legal saying, I have to go do it. It's the latest thing. I'll just tell you, 60 years of ketamine experience in emergency rooms, hospitals, and clinics all over the world. It is the safest profile of all of them because we know the most about it. And it works very well for therapeutic interventions. And you can do it right now, to the point there are companies letting you do it at home. I'm not sure that I'd want to do that, but wow, like why would we not use this if the goal was to provide the greatest good for people with the lowest level of risk and to do the other stuff? I think MDMA is amazing. It leaves you like hungover the next day for most people. And, it's not a great party drug. I don't think you use it a lot. It's going to probably change your receptors, but it can be a beautiful experience once a quarter. Right. How often can people use ketamine in your experience?
Well, in the clinical practice, and the studies, we see that people who have treatment-resistant depression. So this is in the FDA trials. We've seen people with treatment-resistant depression using ketamine 2 to 3 times a week for 2 to 3 weeks. And that is enough to get them from a state of completely treatment refractory resistant depression, so depression that hasn't gotten better by trying most things, to no longer depressed and feeling pretty good. In many cases, no longer meeting diagnostic criteria for depression. And the therapy that we combine with the ketamine amplifies that. Ketamine is, because it's a very interesting situation we have right now with ketamine, because unlike the other psychedelic medicines that are going through rigorous FDA trials for the first time as psychedelic psychoactive medicines, where therapy is actually required as part of the protocol, because ketamine came through the anesthesia and emergency medicine community. It was actually used by anesthesiologists and emergency medicine docs before it was used by psychiatrists. And so there is no therapy required technically for ketamine, but it still has some benefit even when administered without therapy. And those benefits can include everything from reducing suicidal ideation and suicidal thoughts, even with just one dose, to helping people who have had chronic depression feel pretty good for a couple weeks after just 1 or 2 or 3 doses. And, to contrast that to what the antidepressants we currently use and prescribe commonly, like Prozac, Zoloft, of the SRI family, that takes 4 to 8 weeks to start working. And they have side effects that are very real, like numbing. Sometimes they increase anxiety for the first 4 weeks. Sometimes they increase suicidal ideation in young people and suicidal thoughts. Sometimes they decrease the ability to access orgasm and climax during sex, right? Which is a primary point of joy for many people who are depressed. And now we're actually giving them a stabilization medicine like Prozac or Zoloft that can take that away. And so I think this really challenges, what's happening with ketamine is really challenging the paradigm, and other psychedelics of, it's challenging the paradigm of the way we currently treat mental illness, because it makes you think that perhaps we don't need to be taking medicine every single day or multiple medicines every single day to treat our mental illness. only to know that as soon as we stop taking those medicines, we're likely to relapse, which is what the studies show, that perhaps there's another approach, which is if I can help you through these incredibly powerful mind quieting experiences of non-judgmental self-observation and acceptance, and you can witness your own thought process, then perhaps I can, as the spiritualists say, I can not enlighten you, but illuminate you to the idea, right? To wake you up out of your sleep to the idea that there's more to this process that you can take on yourself, and that you can actually learn to heal yourself again, because the healing comes from us. And I always thought that was just such a beautiful thing that we're learning from the psychedelic movement.
It is a beautiful thing, Dave. And I try to explain this to people who've never done psychedelics or even breath work or any of the other technologies. Number one, you don't have to do a psychedelic to access these states. There's classes you can take on just like basic breath work or basic sex techniques that you probably didn't learn, however you learned that stuff. By the way, you probably learned it in high school with, the back of a car or whatever the heck. It probably wasn't like someone who's telling you, here's what this does, here's what this does. And most of the time we don't even have that. Right. Unless, you're very fortunate and you've either, had a lover or a teacher or both who teach you that. And I am fortunate that way. And it sounds like you are as well. So these are spiritual practices. And, we've both gone down to Peru. I went down in 1999 and said, I want to try ayahuasca. And they looked at me and they said, you're white. And I said, yeah, I know. They said, it's for locals. You'll throw up. You won't like it. I said, no, I've done my research. I'm familiar. I'm here. So a couple of days later, the guy shows up and, from the Shipibo people. And, I did the ceremonial stuff, and I kind of feel a little bit bad about adding it into the biohacking pantheon of options, kind of early in creating the biohacking movement, because it's the most powerful, but it's also the most dangerous, other than maybe ibogaine, and certainly datura are like, you just shouldn't use datura unless you're like a really crazy psychonaut. So I wish I had just talked more about like MDMA and psilocybin, because those are much less spiritually dangerous, I think, than ayahuasca. And I always kind of cringe when I see like Aubrey Marcus, I've done 87 ceremonies. Like, when are you going to notice it's not working very well? Because if you have to do 87 ceremonies and you're not living in the jungle in shamanic training, you might be relying on it for something that isn't what you think it is. And you might be leading people down a path unknowingly. I'm sure the intentions there are good, but it doesn't matter what the intentions are. All I care about is actions. So I actually encourage people to look at that as the final thing. If you haven't got there from the other much safer ones, and ketamine is by far the safest that's going to take you on a real journey. Cannabis, it won't take you on much of a journey unless you eat a lot of it, but it's just not a very beneficial journey.
It's a little
salvia too. Yeah, salvia, which is legal, it doesn't do that much. It seems like it's kind of a fake overlay for me. I don't think it's a healing restorative thing. What do you think?
Salvia is pretty wild. I mean, I think it has to be ingested in just the right way, almost like smoked DMT, where you have to heat it at a very, very high temperature and take a huge amount of it inhaled to get the effect. But when you actually get the effect from salvia, it's actually very similar to a DMT or a 5-MeO DMT experience, but it lasts for seconds, right? Yep. So I think the challenge with those kinds of medicines that are incredibly popular right now, particularly the smoked DMT and 5-MeO DMT, is that they take you to these incredible places, but if you can't remember any of it, or you can't remember it enough to make it actionable and take what you're learning out and then manifest that intention in your life through action, kind of like what you were saying, then what's the point, right? You're just kind of using it as an escape, or you're chasing the dragon, right? And that's not the goal. The goal is to engage. The goal is to align our actions with our intentions. I think this brings up one question I really wanted to hear your take on, because I get this question all the time from my clients, which is, and I really want to ask you this with your perspective on neurofeedback, because I think a lot of people are actually apprehensive about doing these techniques, whether it's working with ketamine or not touching a psychedelic medicine at all, even with neurofeedback and psychotherapy, there is a concern that I hear being surfaced more and more often, which is, Doc, am I going to be the same afterwards? Like, so much of what I do and so much of my energy and my passion in my life, I feel like is related to these hardships that I went through and some of these traumatic experiences that I might have had. If I process through all that stuff and I solve it, right? Am I going to be the same person? Am I going to be able to accomplish the same kinds of things? Or am I going to be totally different? And, you're going to go live on a farm somewhere and, change my whole life and be unrecognizable to my friends and family. I think I know the way that I answer this for my clients, but I would love to hear the way that you describe it, because I think it's a common misconception in the space.
I actually say, there's a great chance you'll be different and you can be happier, you can be better off. And I'm not going to pull any punches here. You might find that some of the friends or family that you spend a lot of time with are not actually helping you. And it'll feel good to make those changes. But if you like where you are and you don't feel stuck and everything's working the way you want it to go and you don't have anything to work on, congratulations. You're actually probably not human. Welcome to planet Earth, because everyone who is wearing a meat suit has invisible filters on their reality. It comes from being born. It comes from your experience in the womb. It comes from your experience growing up and little things you won't even remember. And so what if there was a beautiful world right outside of you and you didn't know how to see it? What if the reason you yelled at your partner or your kids or your boss or whatever, what if it wasn't because you're a bad person? What if it's just because you had bad programming and it was something that you could change, right? So yeah, change is scary. And if you want to stay the way you are, by all means, don't come.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that. And I think that is very true, right? People do grow, and growth can be new and uncertain because we're growing into the unknown, and we will often be different at the end. But I think that those differences don't leave behind what we brought in, right? Like the person we were before we took the medicine or had the powerful neurofeedback experience or the breath work or the therapy, that person is still there. It's just that part of ourselves, that person that we consider ourselves to have been, now also has this broader awareness of all the other facets of our lives and everything else that also matters to us. And all these other things that were motivating us to maybe, react irritably to people because we were triggered, but not realizing why or how or what was going on, or why we were making certain decisions in our lives that always had an outcome that was undesirable, but we still make them. Right. Mm-hmm. And that impacts everything from our sleep to our relationships to our ability to achieve our goals at work and with our families and what we define as success in our lives. And so I think, it's a really interesting question, because people know that there's going to be something different that happens and something different about them. And yet they also are, they also are concerned that they're going to lose something in the process, which I think is not what's happening, right? It's more of a growth expansion mindset that we're fitting in, rather than I'm leaving this person behind to become new Dave now,
I think I just tell people you are going to lose something. You're going to lose a lot of pain and suffering. And it's just a part of life. You can reduce it. And if you identify with that and you think your suffering is good for you, then you should keep doing it. It seems like a poor trade-off, but I don't think it's ethical to tell them they're not going to lose anything. You're just going to lose things that are holding you back. And if there's a part of you that comes out of trauma that you identify as being a core part of you, you're just mistaken, right? It's like the old cargo cults back in the jungle. Something falls out of an airplane and they think it must be from the gods, so they build a religion around a crate. And they believe it to be true fundamentally, and telling you it's not true, they might cut your head off and shrink it. Yeah, it doesn't mean it wasn't reality. So the more terrified you are of any kind of these therapies, the more you need them. Because people who don't have a lot of trauma will present curiosity, whether it's about doing a 40 years Zen neurofeedback thing, or whether it's about like me. Hey, do you guys know where I can find some ayahuasca around here? Before it was a tourist industry in Peru, and curiosity is the antidote to fear. It's actually not love. You can be terrified and still be in love. You cannot be curious and afraid. So if you find you're fearful and not curious, something programmed you to be that way, and it wasn't you. So if you like knowing that something programmed you without your knowledge or permission or consent, then don't do any work on yourself at all and enjoy your box. And it's okay to do that. There's no one making you do this.
Yep, absolutely. And and then there's the point at which we start to become aware sometimes, usually from our close loved ones, that those behaviors might actually be causing suffering in others, which then causes more suffering in us. And that's when I think a lot of people make the decision of, or come to the realization of, hey, maybe I do need to change something about myself, right? Maybe it's not just always everybody else's fault. And I really like the way that you said that. I always enjoy our conversations. I really appreciate your time. And for everybody who's listening, check out Dave's show and check out his books. They're really inspiring and really groundbreaking in terms of the way that you can learn new ways to think about the world and about health. And definitely check both of us out at the Biohacking Conference this year, Upgrade Labs, in Dallas, in May 31st and June 1st, right?
May 31st or 30th, 31st and June 1st. I think it's 3 days, end of June, end of May, beginning of June, biohackingconference.com. And we'll be there. Maybe we'll get to even have dinner. It's always tough when, I'm running the event, but it's always such a pleasure to hang out, Dave, and talk about, consciousness, and just be curious and ask the questions like, what would happen if you put an Apollo on this part of the body? What does the right bicep versus the left tricep do? And it turns out there's probably acupuncture meridians there. And what if we do a little ketamine at the same time? Like it's just these bodies, we don't know that much about them, but we're learning, and it's exciting. It's a good time, and I'm excited to be on the journey with you.
Likewise. And curiosity is one of our best characteristics as human beings, and it's an incredibly healing and important process for growth. And what could be more exciting about life in terms of the meaning of life than learning how to discover ourselves and what we're capable of in this lifetime, right? So Thank you so much for helping us to do that better, for sharing your wisdom and techniques with us, and really look forward to seeing you in May.
Looking forward to it, Dave. See you guys, biohackingconference.com, 40yearsofzen.com.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Psychedelic Report. Visit us at thepsychedelicreport.com. This show is recorded weekly on Clubhouse with a live audience. The Psychedelic Report was brought to you by Apollo Neuroscience and produced by Future Medicine Media. While I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. So please don't take anything you hear on the Psychedelic Report as personal medical advice, because we don't know you. If you have questions about anything you hear on this show, please consult with your doctor.